Hello, everybody. I see Natalia is joining right now. That's good. Um, yeah, okay. So welcome back, everybody. Um, I have my camera on because my wife convinced me that it's important for us to see each other because we miss each other, and we do. So um, hope this is helpful anyway. We need to pick up where we left off last time with Judaism. Dorian, we're really glad to have you with us today. We missed you certainly on Tuesday. Natalia, between you and Dorian, if you want to figure out how to proceed, but I think this is the next slide.
I can take this one. So, some of the similarities between Christianity and Judaism that we had found were that there's definitely, of course, the shared Old Testament. And then, in addition to that, shared baptism. Um, or in speaking with my interviewee, she had said that it's important to do that for purification reasons, for the feeling of that renewment and getting rid of sin and whatnot. And then as for organization, we kind of already went through that with the four different types of sects within Judaism, and then those like subcategories within that. And then they are organized. It depends on if it's, if you're believing in the rabbinical versus the non-rabbinical sects of the religion, but they do have kind of somewhat of an organized structure within their church, I guess, with rabbis, and then there is a chief rabbi as well. Some might compare it to having priests or the pope or this or that, or having just a big leader to look up to for authorization of things and for approval of things and such. I think that does it for this one.
Okay, thanks. Interestingly, too, by way of comparison, um, there are all kinds of purification rites in Judaism, both of rabbinic origins, but also from Old Testament origins. But those mainly had to do with the priests and the priesthood. The parallel to baptism in Old Testament Judaism had to do with or was circumcision. So at 8 days old, the boys were circumcised. Then we get to the New Testament, and that's abandoned in favor of baptisms, um, and it's boys and girls, male and female, baptized. Looking back at the Old Testament, the reason for circumcision with the males had to do with the promise that through the seed, the male offspring of the woman, Eve, the Messiah or the Savior would come, and a confirmation of that promise from God to Israel was that the males would be circumcised, reminding them that through the seed, so you can get the connection relationship between the seed of the male and circumcision, that there was a promise at work there. So eventually, the seed of God would come to a woman, Mary, and that would be the incarnation of the Son of God, who is the Messiah. Um, so that's why circumcision comes to an end with Jesus, but then the confirmation of God's promises to Christians would going forward by way of baptism, and then the Lord's Supper, of course, replaces the Passover meal, um, and then Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is replaced by the office of the keys. So Jesus tells his followers, "Whoever sins you forgive, they have been and remain forgiven." Okay, let's see what we got next. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take this one. So this is talking about where they practice the religion and the text that they have. So they usually practice in the temple or the synagogue, and there's like three main texts that they normally read and practice. So the first one is the Tanakh, the second one is the Torah, and the third one is the Ketuvim. So yeah, I think that's the three main ones that they usually read.
Okay, thank you. So Torah, we have looked at this last time. So it can mean the whole Old Testament. Um, Mine's at the office. I should put it in front of the camera for you, but the whole big Hebrew Old Testament Bible, the title on the cover of it's Torah. Inside, it's separated into three main sections. The Torah again, but now referring to the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The Kithim, number 3 on the slide, that is a Hebrew word for the writings, which is referring to poetry. So that's Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And then the one that's missing on here, so Tanakh, I'm not thinking right away what that's referring to, but the Nevi'im is the third section of the Hebrew Old Testament, and that's the Hebrew word for the prophets. So 3 kinds of writings in the Old Testament: law, Moses, poets, and then the prophets. I'm going to skip by this one, and we'll come back to this. We'll catch these crises under this slide. Okay, so Dorian, I think Natalia has a connection problem, so if she doesn't come back, you're our main man here today. So what did you find commendable about Judaism?
Something that I found commendable was the fact that they don't believe in original sin. So like when they're born, like they believe that you are born without sin, and then you become a sinner when you commit a sin later on in your life. And I don't know, I think it's commendable, but I feel like it's also problematic in a way. But I feel like it's commendable because I think they hold like humans in a higher standard, I guess, than like Christians would, or like yeah, Christians. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was commendable, but I can see why it's problematic too.
Yeah, okay, and then we've seen that all semester long. That's often the case. Dorian, just share your what do you think about this? Is something commendable if it's not true or factual or real? So in other words, if we really do have original sin, which is referring to a corruption of human nature from the time of conception, if that's true, then is it still commendable if a religious system doesn't believe it? What do you think?
Uh, I think it is still commendable, if not, even if it's not necessarily true, because I think like the way that they think, I guess, is like they're thinking in a commendable way, like holding people to like be, I guess, of a higher standard of life, or like higher like moral values, I guess.
Hmm. Okay. So here's an interesting moment when we think about religion and religious thought. Some people would argue that whether or not the principle is true or factual, if it produces a good result, then it's worth keeping. And so, very interesting. 2 examples. One from the USSR. Okay, so when the Soviet Union was established with Marxist ideas, which were atheist and very anti, especially Orthodox Christianity, but religion in general. So they wanted to do away with all those things that were associated with religion, including marriage. And so they're not going to worry about marriage anymore, and the state is sort of going to take control of raising the population instead of parents per se. And what they discovered very quickly after they had done away with marriage is that chaos was setting in, and it was having really detrimental effect on the population. And so they reinstituted marriage, even though um, um, their philosophical commitments rejected the idea that there was any truth in the basis for marriage. Similarly, in France, and this was, let's see, 1980s, we had an exchange student from France, and she was telling us that France generally is also, if not atheistic, agnostic, the general population. They also kind of did some experimenting with doing away with institutions that have their origins in religion in general and Christianity in particular, and discovered the same thing. And so a little different than the USSR, though, is that France decided to kind of be at least a little more encouraging in terms of people pursuing religious commitments, because it had this really salutary effect, a positive effect on people and on the population. And there's been lots of studies done that have concluded that religious people in general, and again Christians in particular, are healthier in general, healthier than the rest of the population. It has to do with optimism and hope and relief for both for fears and worries, but also for guilt and those kinds of things. Yeah, so Natalia, sorry about, I've had connectivity problems today too, so I'm glad you're back. Natalia, what did you find commendable about Judaism?
I thought it was interesting that they are really accountable for their actions. And then, um, based off of how I've seen people practice, that they're not super focused on the institutionalization of it. It's not all about, the temple says this, the temple says that. And then I did think it was really interesting that they don't emphasize converting people. Um,
Mhm.
and how that can be kind of an issue because this is the way, the truth, and the light, this religion. How are you going to spread the word to people? But I think over time, converting people and for not forcing, but it conversion has become somewhat forced in certain areas. So I think it's commendable that they do not, emphasize forcing people into believing their religion. Um,
Mhm.
I think that it leads to more peace because we have seen a lot of people, you know, dying for their religion, for whether they're, protecting theirs, whether they're trying to spread theirs, whatever it is. So I think it's commendable because I think it has led to much less warfare, much less, oppression and stuff like that. Um, for me, this was one of the few religions that I've seen that, doesn't really emphasize, you have to, spread the word and you have to
Mhm.
convert, have to be of this religion to be saved. Um, and I think that that puts more emphasis on the meaning of their religion, saying, we believe that you should be good, and if you do that, then it's enough. So I think that was
Mhm.
pretty.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so when we think about the four branches, and then kind of right away, maybe we only need to think about one branch to begin with, and that would be the Orthodox, so we kind of know the baseline here. And of course, Orthodox Judaism is not, yes, true, it's not going to be evangelistic, although it has this sense of superiority. In going to unpack something here for us today about history. Orthodox Judaism does have a very tangible sense of superiority because they read the Bible to say, and so believe that they are chosen to be a special people. Now, right here, there's a fork in the road because both Old Testament and New Testament texts say, along with that, that they were chosen in order to be a conduit to the rest of the world. In other words, they were supposed to be ambassadors for God in the world. They were supposed to be the means by which God's truth and grace and promises came to the rest of the world. So that was supposed to be very V-like, but then it turned to being very pyramid-like. And that kind of intersects with Natalia's talking about converting other people, or this mission emphasis, where some religious systems feel very, very much like they need to get everybody under that pyramid. So there's a sense of control involved there and power, but charitably speaking, there's also a sense of safety, like you're in the pyramid, so this is a good and safe place for you to be. But still, it's you for those people who are controlling the pyramid, not they for you, in contrast to the other model where leadership is beneath you and supporting you and holding you up, kind of thing. Okay, so also speaking historically, so people, when you think about the history of Israel and Judaism, their minds always go right away immediately to the Holocaust. So in the 1940s, and a particular effort by Nazism, let's distinguish that from whoever was involved, but just Nazism, is going to eradicate the Jewish population. And of course, we're all, uh, in shock about that, and it's abhorrent to us. It's not acceptable, not tolerable. And yet, go back in the history of Judaism itself, is that what about when Israel came into the Promised Land in 1446, and we're supposed to annihilate 7 nations that inhabited that area of the world? So wasn't that wrong too? And even today, in Orthodox Judaism, the idea is that if they can succeed in satisfying God's expectations for them, then God will respond by sending the Messiah, and the Messiah will reestablish the predominance of Judaism in the world, both politically and religiously and monetarily. Really, it's a wealthy kind of issue. But other people have had that same idea too. Now, built into that, you could argue, look, where do most of the Nobel Prize winners come from? They come from the Jewish population. So why not let them have more control over the governance of the world? Now, interestingly, same time that Nazism is trying to eradicate the Jewish population, and part of that is because people resented the Jewish people having too much power, too much control, too much of the wealth. So if you remember, some of the Jewish families whose homes and possessions were by the Nazis had tremendous wealth and possessions to be looted. That was part of the conflict here. Let's go around the world, other side of the world, in Japan. Here you also have a very powerful nationalistic and ethnic identity, which also says we are a super race of people, and with that superiority comes an obligation, and therefore a license, if you will, for imperialism. So we're going to take over the rest of the world too, or at least the other half of the world that Nazism isn't working on. And of course, the third part of that alliance was Italy, not anywhere, not thinking like that at all, really, like Italian superiority and Roman Catholic superiority. Mussolini, if he was Roman Catholic, he wasn't a very good one. Fascism is what Mussolini was about. Anyway, just to kind of remind us that if you look back through history, most nationalities and ethnicities, races, if you're willing to use that category, even if we don't believe it's real, that there's just one human race. Nevertheless, it's hard to find a people group that hasn't asserted its sense of personal superiority in imperialistic kinds of ways, even between Native American tribes in North America before colonialism. You see that kind of issue at work among warring tribes in the Middle East at the time of Muhammad. One more thing too about the commendable piece and what Dorian was saying is that it is possible to have the highest of all views of humanity and the lowest at the same time, to hold those things in tension. And so it's a common misunderstanding about biblical teaching and Christianity that people are basically evil. That needs to be nuanced a little bit. What we mean is that the corruption, so first of all, there's a difference between what corrupts human nature and the human nature itself. So Bible and Christianity still believe that God is the creator of each human being from conception on. But since Adam, the substance of human regeneration, that's God's work, is infected with a corruption that's very powerful and very active and very assertive. Okay, so on the one hand, we still have the highest value of life, every human being, no matter what. And so this is why Christianity X, at least, is against abortion under any circumstances, because it holds human life too cheaply enough that it could be terminated, and at this time has the highest, I guess you'd say, healthy respect for the nature of the corruption, for the threat, the seriousness of the threat of the corruption that's inside human nature, which of course Christianity X provides a solution for. I thought maybe you would consider, and maybe we could right now, the most commendable thing about Judaism Okay, hey everybody, sorry. Uh, my internet failed, so I had to switch to my iPhone. Okay, let's see, commendable, no. Problematic, Natalia.
Um, I think that I was there's like a few things that I think are problematic. One of them was also that what I found commendable, which was that they don't sorry, the word um, or try to convert people. There we go. And they're not super strong with the spreading of the message because I think that kind of does take away from uh, you know bringing the good news to people. And I think that let's see, sorry, I have all this stuff written down, but it's all over the place right now. um, uh, oh yeah, definitely. Something that I found problematic was finding like they have a lot of criteria for when they think the end times are coming, when the Messiah is coming, all that stuff. And I think it kind of takes away from the important like stepping stones and landmarks that have happened throughout the history of this faith. I think that I do understand where they're coming from. They should have really high standards when it comes for, the Messiah and everything. But I think that they're very quick to discredit certain things. And I think that that kind of takes away from seeing, the miracles of things and seeing the importance of, certain messages being spread. And I think that a lot of what people after the Old Testament have said and they've done have kind of been discredited um, because it doesn't fit a specific quota for them or a specific set of standards, and then at that point they kind of just throw it out instead of considering it and saying this is important. And I think that kind of somewhat prevents the religion from growing and whatnot.
All right, thank you. Dorian, problematic?
Yeah, something I found problematic about the religion was that they tend to alter like the text and the rules and regulations a lot just to like kind of fit what they're like going through at the moment. So like they alter like a lot of the things in the religion to kind of make it fit with what they're comfortable with, I guess. I don't know if that made sense.
It does make sense, and it's really important. And I have some examples of that coming up. So here is a extraordinarily important measure of religious veracity, the truth value, um, or reliability of a religious system, and that is consistency over time. So when you have primary religious texts that say this came from God and this is how you know it's true and this is how things work, and then over time, not from outside influences but from within the system, they begin to make changes in what their religious beliefs are. That raises some really serious questions, and that's why I want you to think about the Bible, Old and New Testament, and whether the Bible and its meaning, its intended meaning, which is my area of expertise in graduate studies, is enduring, or whether that too has been changed. Now, there's plenty of changes in Christian belief and practice over time, and plenty of arguments about how the Bible's not saying things that people don't want it to say today, but that hasn't changed what the text is saying, and the possibility that what the Bible is saying is still applicable and ideal, really. And that's what we're sort of considering or testing when we think about, when I put before you this model for a three-dimensional world in Christianity X. Okay, a crisis in the system. Dorian?
Yeah, a crisis. So I think, let's see. I actually don't remember what I've put for crisis.
Hmm.
Um,
So I'll see if I can find it. Just while I'm working on that, Natalia, do you remember you have your crisis?
Yeah, so I definitely the destruction of the temple was a big crisis, and then we kind of already went over with the Holocaust thing. I think that in Judaism there's been a lot of scapegoating, and I think that that has um, deterred the religion from growing and proceeding and becoming something greater than it is. I mean, it already is very, big and very great, but I think that um, sometimes it scares people away to say, I'm going to be part of something that has, brought a lot of these people pain and suffering,
Mm-hmm.
destruction.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, with the destruction of the temple, I think that for the religion itself, they lost their center, and they also kind of had
Mm-hmm.
issues with, do we rebuild? When do we rebuild? Who's gonna come and say, it's time, and how is that gonna get done? It had already been destroyed twice, and it's like, where do you go from there, and how do you, have a central focal point for your religious system when it's been destroyed so many times,
Mm-hmm.
strongly, and you've lost a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thanks. Dorian, what you said was the Jewish law is always evolving and changing, which is what I was just talking about before this. So I think that you can make an argument, a really powerful argument for any religious system, that when it begins to change what it's saying in substantive ways, you have a crisis on your hands in two ways. One is it's a crisis if the changes mean that you're going to leave the original form of the religion behind, so it's not going to endure. It's going to come to an end at some point in time when the changes are made. And the second problem you have is that, how do we know that the changes that are made will be enduring? How do we know it's just a matter of time before those things get changed too? So a little moment in more recent history. So in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of, I guess you could say a lot of Christian churches thought that they were doing the right thing by abandoning biblical concepts of gender role and kind of going with the flow of civil life in Western nations. So when women were obtaining the right to vote and also beginning to take positions in the workplace in greater number, then the churches, Christian churches, thought they were being progressive and up to date by abandoning the biblical ideals, I should say, of gender and relationship. And so they started to ordain women, for example, to be pastors. Lots of Lutheran churches went that direction. Then another 40 years or so later, a little less than 40 years, those same churches, after embracing feminism, embraced homosexuality. And so not only were eager to and welcomed gay marriage, but also were ordaining homosexuals as pastors. And now there's been an abandonment by some people of their church, because they say that's just going too far. And so they're kind of retreating back to more traditional notions, biblical notions of gender, but not retreating all the way. So who is supposed to figure that out? And so what's happening practically speaking is, yeah, Spencer, I'll come back to that in a minute, is that people are kind of settling for a church that seems to be a fit for them, that they resonate with, and even more importantly than that, a church where the pastor is likable, where they just like the pastor and they like the people, and that's going to be the guiding factor, since all the rest of it seems to have gone unknown. Who can figure this out? Yeah, so Spencer, if you look in the chat box there, what if the changes are justified by saying the changes have always been there, they just weren't understood at the time? Yeah, it's still a crisis, because you have this problem now of authentication. Who's actually going to be the authority to say that the way it was is the way it's supposed to be, or no, the way we understand it now is the way it's supposed to be? And actually, maybe I'm a contender to be that kind of authority because of my studies of texts, especially religious texts, and how do you understand them. It also has to do with which models you approach things in. So if you approach the Bible with a red pyramid world model, you're going to have to throw all of it away, almost all of it away. It just won't work. But if you adopt a green V model that's three-dimensional, you don't actually have problems with any of it, and including how it interfaces with the culture as we experience it today. Dorian, did I ask you about a crisis? Yes, I found it in your paper. Okay, I thought certainly the Holocaust was a crisis or a near crisis. That's typically in semesters past, that's what students that study Judaism tended to gravitate towards, but other people would argue, well, it was almost a crisis, but didn't see it. It failed. And interestingly, it failed because of Western allies who value human beings and value the commitments of those human beings if they're not dangerous for other people. So we defend the defenseless. That's a biblical virtue and notion of how we should live our lives. Let's go back in time, though. Wouldn't it be a crisis for Judaism? Let me pause and take Ryan's comment. Would Jesus of Nazareth be considered a crisis in Judaism? Absolutely. So much so that in spite of the fact that he was for 3.5 years feeding the hungry and healing the sick and raising the dead and raising the, kind of the level of ideal and virtue of goodness among people and between people, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. That was his only crime, and so he was executed. And so I think you can make a tremendous case, Ryan and class, kind of yes and no. Jesus of Nazareth was a crisis for Judaism because he exposed it for being a very different thing than God was doing through the Old Testament period. And therefore everybody would have abandoned Judaism as it was practiced in the first century. But then no, not a crisis, because they actually did succeed in executing him and have been successful to a certain extent over time in vilifying Jesus, and so being an obstacle to people, especially to Jewish people, being an obstacle to them embracing the fulfillment of their own Old Testament scriptures. But crisis-wise, so one crisis has to be 722 BC when the Assyrians captured and took away captive and took over the real estate of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. So that's 722. 587, the Babylonians come and take away the remaining 2 tribes of Israel, That's the Babylonian captivity. Those tribes come back, but they're not free. They're still under foreign rule through the Persian and Mede and Persian Empire, and then the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. They had a brief resurgence around 162, 164 BC when they reasserted their authority again and functioned independently, but only for a very short time, and then the Romans took over again. And then 70 AD, this has to be in the crisis category. The temple was destroyed, and so was Jerusalem, and the Jews were pursued um, by the Roman Empire. And so, interestingly, in the 1500s, when the Jewish people are still kind of asserting their claims to being a special people of God, and therefore having particular claims over the promised land, so to speak, Middle East and so forth. Martin Luther was just thinking, if you were the favorite chosen people of God, then how do you explain that you haven't lived in the promised land for 2,000 years at that time, right? So 500 BC until 1500 AD. How do you make sense of that? And then this will be true for another 448 years until 1948, when it was the Western Allies, not God, who established a Jewish state, completely contrary to the way Abraham conducted himself in that same area of the world. So all of that is of the nature of a crisis for Judaism. Most recently, um, now he's now deceased, but Charles Krauthammer, who was Jewish, wrote an article about how, apart from any other outside influences or contraries, Jewish people are on their way to extinction simply by abandoning their identity, their historical and traditional identity, and by intermarriage. And so the Jews that are left are intermarrying generation after generation to the extent that in reality there is no more a Jewish population. We're not there yet, but it's coming soon. Okay, so moving on to Malloy. Natalia, what did you have to say about Malloy's treatment of Judaism?
Um, well, I thought that it was interesting because he brought up a point about exclusivity between religions and how monotheistic religions are very exclusive, meaning that like they recommend that you withdraw yourself from certain foods or places or people groups or certain practices, and that the sacred world is very distinct from the normal world. They separate good from bad and true from false. With this, I thought, it is very, after going through all these other religions, I've noticed that some of those religions are just a way of life or a way of maintaining, yourself and your place in this world. And they don't really restrict you from certain things. But with Judaism, there are certain things that you're restricted from, kind of, you know, uh, bring you away from certain things, participating in certain things like, eating pork or having things with blood in it. So that's certain like cultural things that you might go somewhere and you might not be able to participate in those things. And I never really looked at it. I kind of thought of it as, oh,
Mhm.
kind of a rule of the religion.
Mhm.
But in reading Malloy's thoughts on it, I had seen how he thought that there are exclusive and inclusive religions, and Judaism kind of falls into that exclusive one, with more of those, uh, you know, separate yourself from this, that, and that type of thing.
Okay, good, thank you. Dorian?
Yeah, so kind of similar. Oh, I mean, I guess something different, besides what Natalia said, is that he talks about how like well, he talks about the natural world and Judaism a little bit, and he also talks about the human purpose for Judaism. And I think that uh, I like I like the way he talks about the human purpose because it kind of goes along with Judaism because it talks about the struggle between the forces of good and evil, kind of, and human beings and how they're kind of the center of it, and how they have to, I guess, struggle to find like the moralic value. I don't even know if that's a word, but the moral value like within the religion. So yeah, I guess.
Okay. So while I got you there, Dorian, I'll be Jewish and you be who you are, and what would you like to ask me?
Okay. So let's see. What do you believe about God?
God is one, and we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength.
hmm Okay. So how can a person be saved in Judaism?
You're saved by keeping the law, the Torah, which God gave to Moses and which has been preserved for us and explained so that we're better able to keep it through the history of Jewish instruction and leadership, also known as the rabbinic history.
hmm Okay. Um. So what do you believe about good and evil?
Um, we believe that there is good, and that's what the law of God commands and describes. And there is evil, but it doesn't exist independently of us. Evil is what happens when people um, are determined not to do what's good.
hmm Okay. Um. So what do you believe about the world?
Um, the world's, what do you mean?
Like the origin of the world and the
hmm
purpose that it has for us, I
Ah,
guess.
okay, sure. Well, the origin of the world's described in Genesis 1 and 2, so it's a creation of God. And it has suffered from the evil that people do. But we have a promise that God will send a Messiah, someone like Moses, like the prophets, who will restore, um, law and order, God's kind of law and order and goodness to the world.
hmm Okay. And how do the people of Judaism tend to organize themselves?
What difference does it make?
Just it's just like something that I'm interested in.
Ah, okay. Um, Well, I'm more interested in whether you are ready to join me. Are you ready to adopt a Judaism as your own belief system?
Uh, I don't think I'm quite ready yet.
And can you tell me why not?
Uh, Wait, I'm supposed to be asking the questions here, right?
Well, you are. Although there's something I'm working on here too. Now I'm not just um, trying to train you to be alert to when the roles get reversed, but now I'm actually moving on to um, I'd like all of you to now today and next week to think about um, the questions that you'd ask, because you went on to ask about, I mean, your questions kind of paralleled the rubric, so I was ready for this and had been doing some thinking about it. Um, why you're asking the questions that you of a person of another religious system, like what are you really working on here? Because I don't ever think of this as an academic affair, but as a diagnostic affair. So it's kind of like visiting the emergency room You would expect the emergency room physician to ask you questions, but all of that person's, his or her questions are going to be with a very specific purpose, like what are the symptoms and how do the symptoms inform me about the cause, which is problematic. This is the thing we need to work on. But let me go back and catch Natalia first. Natalia, I'll be Jewish and you be who you are.
All right. So, um, do you feel entitled to something specific, maybe success or happiness, or maybe something more than the average person because you are considered to be one of God's chosen people?
Yes.
And what would you feel entitled to?
Well, God made promises to us that He would give us the promised land and that He would bless us in that land. These promises are very prominent in Exodus and Deuteronomy, even in Genesis, promises to Abraham. In other words, that by blessing us uh, in the material world with power and with wealth, that power and wealth would overflow from us, and so also we would all the world, it says, would be blessed because of us or through us.
And that's in the physical world that you're living in right now, correct?
Yes, but also in the spiritual aspect that people would look at Judaism and look at us, Jewish people, and our practices and adopt them for themselves, and so also come into a right relationship with God. In other words, they would abandon, pagan practices and join us in knowing God as God is and relating to God as God instructs us on how to relate to Him.
So you're saying that others can join you in this just by looking at your example, or is there some type of outreach or teaching that you would do to those people to have them join you in that?
No, really just join by observing our example. Hmm.
And would you be willing to teach that to someone to say if they came to you and said, I admire the way that you live your life and I admire your success. How can I follow in that? Would you be willing to be more specific, or are you closed off to that because you're not supposed to, try and convert someone?
No, we're open to that. And just a note, um, so um, Natalia, I appreciate your questions, but they are making things too easy for me because they tend to be yes or no questions. So see if you can, well, just tell me, because now we'll be, friends here in a class in the university. What are you working on? What are you trying to get at here?
I'm just trying to get to know more of, what's out there for me and what I could experience and how I could get to that point.
Okay, I see. Um, okay, let me ask you, like I asked Dorian, are you ready to adopt Judaism?
I'm not ready to adopt Judaism as a full faith. I think that I am willing to adopt different practices and different teachings from it. But I think personally, I find value in countless religions, and I think that it would be unfair to claim Judaism when I find a lot of value in other religions and other practices.
Okay, wow, that's a really good answer. And so let me follow up with this then. Is is the nature of what you find valuable in various religious traditions, um, does does that tend to be both pragmatic and ethical in nature, or is there something about another or other religions that actually do something for you that you can't do for yourself?
Um, I think that there is definitely something in other religions that does something that I can't do for myself. I have accepted the fact that I can only do so much, and so I do need to, um, you know, I need guidance. I also need, you know, blessings in this and that. So I definitely think that there's a lot that I can do for myself, and that's why I find a lot of value in the religions that emphasize, you know, the best that you can for yourself and the world around you. But I
Hmm.
definitely value in religions that say, hey, you know, you're human, you're not perfect, you're not a robot, you weren't programmed to do something specific, and sometimes you need a little help here and there. And value in both types.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Dorian and Natalia. Um, Next week we're gonna actually work on this, and I hope really have some tremendous benefits from making a comparison. And I'll try and make that really obvious in slides, and so everybody's going to be part of the conversation next week. I'll make sure of that because I'll just keep working my way through the attendance sheet here. But I want you to start thinking about this now. Um, as long as the idea of free will is in play, and it almost always is, so as long as human beings are convinced that they possess a free will, then religion is always going to be exclusively ethical in nature. In other words, religion is going to be a function of a human will, choices to be a good person by any number of standards, but good is the universal standard, but then each different religion has a particular um, feature of goodness that they're interested in, or aspect of goodness, or something like that, which is why I think what Natalia is saying makes sense, and probably to some extent, all of us practice this. All of us incorporate into our lives um, teachings that come from different places because we're convinced that they work, they're practical, or they're real or true. Um, there probably isn't a person on the face of the planet that conducts himself or herself strictly according to a particular religious system, right? So you know, we have a plate, and you have the vast cafeteria of religion and religious teachings, and some people will stick more with the, you know, it's like at the cafeteria. So here's the Buddhist, you know, a little island of in the cafeteria, and I'm gonna spend most of my time there and fill most of my plate with Buddhist teaching. But you know what? Over at the Christian uh, bar, I found some things that I could use, and I found some things in Confucianism that, so you know, or you'll find a person with maybe almost equal parts from different religious systems on their plates. Um, but there's a spectrum of that. But that's all on one side of an equation. Human free will means ethical approach both to life in this world and ideas about life after this world. That's distinct from the idea that we don't have a free will, but we also don't save ourselves, can't save ourselves, and don't need to save ourselves. That it's not that it can be accomplished, it has been accomplished, and life is the kind of the realization of that fact. But we'll work on that next week. I do want to show you a few more slides about Judaism. So I don't know if you're familiar with Zionism. I don't hear that word a lot anymore. It's kind of settled down a lot in the last a couple decades. But for example, when I was in grad school and I was studying in Jerusalem, in Israel, I was in Jerusalem when the Palestinians had their first election for their first leader, and so the Palestinians were finally gaining recognition as an independent um, state, I guess. So, right. So there's the Palestinian state, so to speak. Within this is going on inside the nation of Israel. there was some tension in the city, or you could feel it among the people. But it's calmed down a lot, um, but it's still there. So anyway, Zion is a word that is a name for the Temple Mount, and so sort of the heart of Jerusalem from ancient times. And so Jerusalem could be referred to as the city of David, King David, because that's where he made his headquarters and throne, and that's where he moved the ark to. So he also made it the religious center of the world, really, in his thinking. But it's also known as Zion. So David established his throne in Zion, kind of thing. Okay, so the way we read texts, for example, let me get this pen thing going here. So notice in the Psalms, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem is Zion. May they prosper who love you. And so this is a very powerful text in the minds of people, even to this day. And so there will be both Jewish, but maybe more importantly, non-Jewish people who feel like there is a God, and that God has some kind of special relationship with or interest in Judaism or in the Jewish population. And so to be very philanthropic towards Jewish people, so lots of money, contribute lots of money to the establishment and the success of the Jewish state in Israel, and God will prosper you because you love Israel. Okay, now I'm going to interrupt this idea of Zionism, though, and it's important that you know about this. Sons of Abraham. So the three religious systems that claim to be monotheistic, and I want you to remember right away, as soon as I say monotheistic, well, wait a minute, you can argue reasonably that Hinduism is monotheistic, that Taoism is monotheistic. Taoism doesn't suggest a personal God, a God with a personality, the way monotheism thinks of it, but it is a singular. There's the way, not lots of ways kind of thing. But among those religions, the three that are, people think of as being monotheistic in the first place, all claim Abraham as part of their identity. Now, so Abraham how? So Abraham, by way of Sarah's slave Hagar, has Ishmael, and Ishmael's the firstborn. That's a really powerful and important reality here in time. But Hagar was a slave, and so a kind of a second-class citizen. But along comes Islam and says, no, that's a disinformation. That's spin doctoring of truth in Old Testament and New Testament scriptures. That's why the Quran is necessary to correct those corruptions. See, like human nature is good, but it's been corrupt. So that's Islamic attitude towards Old Testament and New Testament. It's good, but it's been corrupted. Mormonism has a similar view. Then, wait a minute, are the descendants the legitimate, right, descendants of Abraham by way of Sarah? So Isaac is the second born son of Abraham, but the firstborn of the free woman. And so they actually have a better claim, or maybe the only claim, right? A person who's born of a slave is a slave, unless you think differently. Of course, lots of people do. But then very few people remember that Abraham had a third wife, and her name was Keturah, and she had 6 sons. And if you read about the history of those sons and the people that came from them, these are a large population among Middle Eastern people. Okay, and then here's where Christianity actually makes its claim on Abraham, and it's a spiritual reality versus a physical. And so the whole point of Sarah giving birth to Ishmael or conceiving Ishmael as the impossibility of it, which is illustrative of a regenerate soul. And so the children of Abraham are children of promise, and that's described in more detail in Galatians 4 and Hebrews, lots of other places. So it's really helpful if we're going to have a productive conversation about human claims in the world and claims on God on the basis of Abraham, that we sit down and take a look at the basis of that, right? So there are three group of people who are all basing their claim on a physical reality. And you have to remember then, if you're going to ground your argument in physical realities, then the rules and the laws of physical reality are in play. And so in this case, I'd argue that Ishmael has the better claim. But you know, we're not going to resolve that argument in this lifetime. Okay, also back to Zionism a minute. I think about this. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again, look at that. Think about how that would be so important in the mind of Jewish people who can see that they have a very checkered history. In fact, there are times in history where God renounced and rejected Israel because of their failure and idolatry and adoption of pagan practices. But here's a promise that God's going to choose them again. So they're looking forward to this, and they're trying to be worthy of it by reclaiming their identity and the practices that God commanded them, and will, look at this, set them in their own land. Can you see how Western allies post-World War II were being told, hey, you have a responsibility to make this prophecy come true. So, and here it is, and aliens will join them. So this would be Western nations joining Israel in terms of supporting them and establishing them a homeland, okay? And the peoples will bring them to their place. And so was the Western allies that actually provided for the relocation and the repatriation of Jewish people in Israel, and they'll possess the Lord's land and so forth. And then it goes on now. Male and female slaves, and take captive those who were their captives and rule over those who oppressed them. So you see how there's also this idea then that not only should Israel repossess the promised land, but they should also reassert their authority over the rest of the world and the world's population. But that's been in the mind of other peoples. That was in the mind of Marxism. The Soviet Union was planning to take over the world because they figured it out. The Japanese people were planning to take over the world as they had figured it out, and so forth. And so I want to circle back a moment, just while we have a little time yet, circle back to this idea of organization, is that most religious systems are going to look pretty much the same organizationally, because it's just inevitable in humanity. All human organizations tend to look the same because they're going to be pyramid structures, and it is sensible in terms of effective organization, right? This pyramid thing. There's an exception though. When we looked at some of the Eastern religions, and I think Taoism is arguably the best example of this, it was kind of anti-hierarchical. So it was very flat. So there's individuals, and there's individuals' relationship with nature, and that's it. It's you and the way, and away you go, kind of thing. Interestingly, in Christianity, you could say that Baptist theology is closest to that, because Baptists very aware of it's an individual's relationship with God. Evangelicalism is kind of that way too, and yet you'll find there's still structures, organizational structures, that are very pyramid looking. Missouri Synod, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which Concordia Irvine is a part of, actually is arguably the opposite of that. And so we're a congregational structure, even though we kind of don't actually function that way on the books. And ideally, and by way of the teaching of Martin Luther and the successors of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod today, we were congregational in nature, which means every gathering of Lutheran people was autonomous. They had principles that they adopted, which was the Bible as our source of knowledge and truth and so forth. But that's it. There's no pyramid structure. In fact, the larger association of congregations, which is known as a synod, was supposed to really function as this green V kind of a thing. Okay, so we have 2 more class meetings next week. I'm so glad that we have that time because we're going to make good use of it. But as far as, except for the final exam, and I'm so grateful because of the way things worked out this semester with having to go online, I'm glad we front-loaded the semester. I sent y'all an email yesterday about the essay. I didn't say which one it was, but it's the No Other Gospel essay. If you could go back and look at your the end of your No Other Gospel essay, and just email me. Some of you have done this, but most of you haven't. Just send me an email that says either when your last paragraph of the No Other Gospel essay, did you explicitly state who am I and who are they, and then answered that question? That's answer number 1. Or number 2, did you address the question of who am I and who are they on the basis of the essay, but you didn't include the question, you just sort of talked about that? Or did you not answer it at all? The problem for me, of course, is I gave you all your papers back already. Otherwise, I'd just look at that myself. But I remember all 3 of those things kind of happening. And we're required to do an assessment review for accreditation, and I need to have artifacts to do that with, and that's why I need to know. Michael's asking about the final. So we have talked about the day and time of the final. I'll mention that again next week. We're going to meet during the final exam period, which is an hour and 50 minutes long. I think it's from 11 to 12:50 Tuesday of finals week. You'll all come online. I'm going to email you at 11 o'clock. I'm going to email you the final exam and say, ready, go. You're going to mark down your answers, and you can mark them on the, well, I'd rather not have you print the final exam, but note your answers somehow. Then as you finish, you can email me. Email me, say I'm finished with the exam. I'll email you back the key. You're going to grade your own work, and then email me your score. And that will be how the final exam works. You can plug that score into your grade report sheet and add up, and our numbers should agree. So what's your total for the semester? And that's the basis of your grade being calculated. Yeah, so looking forward to next week and kind of circling back and having a conversation. I want to involve you very much in the conversation next week, both days, Tuesday and Thursday. So God bless you and Emily and loved ones, your neighbors, the people who are, the government authorities who, are taking a lot of criticism these days, but doing hard things that are meant to be helpful. Healthcare people, all kinds of other people that are still going to work, and the people that can't go to work. It's just been a great experience to me to watch people kind of be supportive and cooperative and try to be encouraging and good-natured and so forth. Yeah, healthcare people. So God bless us all and bring good from this, and take care, and I'll see you next Tuesday.